I want you to imagine this scenario. People around a budget table with two numbers that they just can't stop thinking about. The first, $900 million. That's what California spends every year teaching freshman and sophomore level general education classes, otherwise known as GE. The next number, 68 billion. It's next year's projected state deficit. In the meeting, someone presses play on the ChatGPT o3 demo. In 5 minutes, the model is wired to Cal GETC, which is California's general education transfer curriculum, the single statewide template that now defines the first 2 years of college. It guides a student through a sample dataset, tags every required learning outcome, and files the proof in a digital portfolio. No lecture hall, no grading pile, and a full audit trail. There's silence in the room, and then someone asks the obvious question. If the course is already standardized, why do we keep paying thousands of lecturers to repeat it? What if AI took half the load and we poured the savings into labs, mentors, and real student support? That's from an article this week by Hollis Robbins. It's titled, Harvard Will Survive, but Will California Public Universities Survive ChatGPT o3?
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin, and how do you develop the mindset and skills to be successful? You're listening to Designing Schools, and I'm your host, Dr. Sabba Quidwai, educator, researcher, and storyteller. Join me each week for stories and strategies that bridge the gap between research and practice, as together we explore how might we design schools.
Stefan, why would somebody even think that kind of scenario after seeing a demo of o3?
I'd start maybe answering your question by saying, go back to what you just asked. Will California University survive? And the way I think you need to answer that question is to say it really depends on what they do. If they try to just keep doing what they're doing, then honestly, I don't think they'll survive. If everything they're doing can be done with ChatGPT o3, and I can talk a bit about some of the capabilities of o3, but even then we have greater capabilities coming, and some of those can be done with emerging models such as Gemini 2.5 Pro, then they're going to have to change. Because these AIs, they're going to be able to teach that intro-level curriculum. So how could these universities adapt? And it's really actually about more than adaptation. How could they change? I think what you're really looking at is curriculum change. Just one quick thought off the top of my head is that students, if they're going to keep this current curriculum, this introductory curriculum, students should be learning this at home from the AIs before they arrive at the university. They should be part of their senior year, their high school curriculum, or summer curriculum before they show up. So that way, when they get to college, when they move into the dorm, maybe many traditional students, then when they get there, they're ready to work with their mentors, which are all the things that are addressed in the article, working with mentors, doing labs, all these types of things. And as I mentioned to you before we even started this podcast, there's a longer article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that we can share with you in the show notes that really makes a similar argument. It's about how a lot of what's being done in universities can be done by AIs, and that these AIs will be increasingly capable of doing that. It even makes a joke that if AIs can do medical researches and solve disease and engage in autonomous warfare, it's probably capable of flipping through a PowerPoint slide. Now, a lot of professors may be offended by that, but the reality is that professors actually do more than flip through PowerPoint slides. And they should do more than that. And that's really where the answer to the question is. They need to flip through fewer PowerPoint slides. That essentially needs to be done by the AI, and then they need to focus on these additional mentorship and interactive components of education.
So just to give everyone an overview, OpenAI released two new models. One of them was o3 and the other was o4 mini. And I think the one that really has people once again just completely in awe and jaw dropped is o3. In fact, I recently had somebody It's so funny. There's a lot of people who are very skeptical around AI, or they're always questioning its abilities. And he texted me and he's like, oh my God, today is just a really big day. This is the best computer, the best thing I've ever seen. And he was actually the one who even sent me that article from which we shared that scenario just in the opening of the episode. But I want to let you know why people are starting to now really consider these scenarios and why people are so shocked. On the OpenAI website, which I always highly recommend reading because they do such a great job of breaking it down, they say these are the smartest models we've released to date, representing a step change in ChatGPT's capabilities for everyone, from curious users to advanced researchers. For the first time, our reasoning models can agentically use and combine every tool within ChatGPT. So if you are a user, you know that it's kind of annoying sometimes, like, oh, I forgot to press image, I forgot to press search, I wish I could have this and this together. It is funny how we become more ambitious the more we get. So basically now, for the first time, the reasoning models can themselves decide when and how to combine and use every tool. So they say this includes things like searching the web, analyzing uploaded files, and other data with like Python, being able to reason deeply about visual outputs. I want you to imagine yourself right now in that meeting. So for example, if you're in a meeting, sometimes you've got, like you said, a PowerPoint slide, sometimes you've got meeting notes, sometimes you've got a website you want people to pull up. The fact that this tool can now come together and merge all of these pieces is once again allowing it to solve more complex problems, but not only more complex problems, really it's the agentic element of it being able to make that decision of when it needs to pull something in, being able to have more autonomy over what it is that it's able to do. And so those are the things that people, as they're trying them and doing it, really have them surprised.
Yes, those are some of the major improvements in the O3 relative to other models. I would add a couple of additional ones. The one is that it seems to be producing more accurate responses and has more reliable content, at least in your basic areas of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Engineering and math may be well due to its focus on reinforcement learning, which is common in even the older models, right? Like ChatGPT 3.5 had reinforcement learning with human feedback. This is just more directed reinforcement learning by the AI itself. If you think about it at the end, before then giving one answer, basically which we learned initially. So the models are predicting the next word and giving you the answer that follows from that next predicted word. But what the models are doing now is they're essentially generating a series of answers and then considering which answer to give you, and then the best answer it chooses, that's being reinforced. It's basic psychology in a sense, if you've heard of reinforcement learning. It's not exactly the same, but you can compare it. They're rewarded for giving accurate answers. So that's really improved the content, and so to speak, and reduce the hallucinations. And due to other efficiency gains, these things are starting to run a lot faster. And the second thing is, as you mentioned, it can search the web, it can use Python, it can combine everything. These are tools. One of the examples that's given, and I put another in my blog, is that say a teacher writes a math problem on the board when you have a student who's trying to figure it out. That student can take a picture of the math problem with the camera. The AI will then convert it to an image, and because ChatGPT 3 can now reason within images, which is a new thing people are saying it can do, it can look and it can say and it can help you with that math. It can walk you through it as a tutor can, and either give you the answer or help you arrive at the answers. And then within images, you can search the web. So if you're like, oh, what is that? It can look on the internet, find out what it is, maybe geolocate the image or locate the Eiffel Tower in Paris, for example. So these are all things that, of course, people could do in the past. It would just take them a very long time to do that. So especially in the classroom setting, you could say, oh, let's go look up that image. Let's find out what it is. And you're getting all these instantaneous responses. And thinking about what the model can do is like anyone taking the API and building a tutoring application right on top of it. Oh, and I should have mentioned that it can easily and rapidly translate languages. I can't translate as many languages as the top models that, I've done a lot more with language translation. I think you're up to 140 languages, but this is working well with 30 languages right now. It's a multilingual tutor. And I'm sure it's covering the basic languages, especially that people in California are using. So for some students, that may be Spanish. English is their second language. Spanish or Korean or Chinese. Those are all some of the common languages, Vietnamese, that we see spoken in California. So the students don't necessarily have to rely on English to learn. I think part of this is, how is it going to transform education? What will teachers become? When I went with you to the training that you did, a couple of the teachers noted that the role of the teacher is going to need to change. And it's not just to be the quote unquote stand in front of the room, even better. And we've reduced the amount of time teachers standing in front of the room already. But we're also doing a little bit of less focused on content, right? It's less content focused, because even now, as we reduce the teacher standing in the front of the room, there's still a lot of focus on the content or transfer of knowledge. And right now, we try to get all these kids in a room and we try to push the knowledge, either by lecturing them or having them work in small groups to absorb it. But we're still pushing around worksheets that you can now generate on Magic School or whatever. It's the same kind of a bit of content focus. But that can all be done with AI. So what role do the humans take? It might be cheaper, you might need less physical space, but it still might be important. Education is probably, it's going to downsize a bit to a degree. You're probably not going to need as many people, but what's going to matter is that the people you have are really good. It's not just someone who knows content, which I think probably is now. I don't sit on hiring committees for professors, but I would imagine that a big element is, what does this professor research? What do they know? That's a defining criteria. It's not going to be so much for a K-12 teacher. They do get certified that they know this information. And then amongst these certified teachers, you pick up a nice person you think is going to be a good teacher. But in universities, it is a bit different. I think these other things are going to become more important. These other things being how they collaborate with other people, how they work with the students, and less on the knowledge. And I think that's going to shock the system a bit, because we've always thought of professors more of what knowledge do they have, not how do they teach. Professors really, they fancy themselves, or at least the majority probably, as purveyors of knowledge, right? Rather than coaches or people who are strong on social emotional learning. All these things that we see a little more in K-12. I think it'll both downsize and transform the university. And there's no getting around that. You just probably need fewer people to teach content.
You know, normally on the episode, I feel we do many different topics and we do many different things. But I feel a couple of things that have happened that really just give us pause to really, again, contextualize what this moment means. And I think people are now so used to these model updates, right? This new model is here, this new thing came, this happened. And I'm going to share a scenario with, so like today is all about scenarios. I'm going to share another scenario with you, but I want to preface the scenario with a quote that we shared a few weeks ago on the podcast that I think is really timely for this moment. It's by Thomas Sowell. And he says, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. And I think if there is like one thing that I have really noticed across the board ever since the release of ChatGPT and ever since the AI conversation really took over everything, there really does seem to be this idea that we must conform to the lowest common denominator. And I want to say that that's definitely not everywhere. But I do think in K-12 education as a whole, perhaps higher education as well, although I saw a lot of, I would say at ASU, like that AI show, I was way more impressed with the higher education places than I was the K-12. I think some of the ways in which they were framing things, the stories they were sharing, the initiatives they were taking, I feel they were really, really, really understanding, hey, this is treating it like a business would. But in K-12, there still very much seems to be this narrative. Yes, but these people just aren't ready. So we just have to do this for them. And they really seem to be the focus versus the more early adopters and even just getting people to really reckon with what's happening. And so I want to share an interaction where I think I might have gotten myself into a little bit of trouble. It's no secret how I feel about traffic lights, but I just can't believe that this is still what's being shared. And if you're not familiar, the traffic light or stoplight method is one that is used by a lot of places to give young people instructions about how, when they should and shouldn't be using generative AI. Now, I want to make really clear that we both really believe and really talk about how important it is to teach young people these skills and decision-making and all of these different elements. But the framing I want to do for this today is, I saw it again on my feed, and it's the way to me that it's celebrated. Okay, this is what I said. I'm going to just read it to you, then you give your opinion. I basically just said, I see this shared so much. And I was like, while the do's and don'ts definitely make sense, the traffic light model, if you think about what we just said about O3, it just assumes such an outdated version of AI. In maybe 2022, November, December, even January, maybe this worked, but it just doesn't work anymore. And I always talk about the parent who shared the story of how their child they weren't allowed to use AI, but when they opened Google, it's the first thing they saw. And it's not just the first thing you see when you open Google, AI is now the first thing most kids see when they open most platforms that they use, Snapchat, Instagram, Meta. And so I said, not only does it feel really impractical, but I feel the bigger issue that I have with the traffic lights is they just really rob people of making decisions, because now someone's made that decision for you. Whereas I do think it's important right now to really help people navigate how to make those decisions through frameworks, through protocols and things like that. And there's just so much gray. I don't know if people realize that there's no debating red, yellow, green, right? Imagine going to China and thinking red is what you want it to mean because you think this should be some type of way, but cause havoc on every single street. So with AI, I also think that creates a really bad impression as well, that there is a standard, that there's not debate when there's so much gray and there's so much debate within these areas, and debates that are really important to have. And then I just keep going back to who came up with this. Who came up with this as a way of even talking to anybody. So anyway, somebody, I think she must have been her friend. She basically comes in and she goes, when stakeholders are called in to develop the guidelines, then their voices must be reflected in the product. And she goes, while I and this other person knows that no AI use is impractical and not the goal. So you're already saying that you realize your model is impractical. But she said it's consistent with the theory of change. She said the school district was so reluctant to even touch or talk about AI a year ago. And now they have everyone excited, but not everyone. So these people needed the no AI option to ease their fear and threat that they felt. This will evolve, and by next year, I think they'll be further along. And I get it, but I want to talk about this for a moment for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think back to that quote by Thomas Sowell, okay? What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to help ourselves by just telling people what they want to hear to make our jobs easier because we need to get a graphic or a guideline or something out? Or are we brave enough to start having conversations about the truth of what this means to actually prepare people for what's coming?
Yes, I could go through a million reasons like why the traffic is bad, but I think to your fundamental question, are we ready to prepare people for what's coming? And I think there's two ways to think about that. I think we are ready as anybody, right, in terms of explaining what's likely coming. The second, I inserted the word likely because we don't know for sure exactly what's coming. At a broad level, we know what's likely coming. We have computers that are smart and smarter than we are. I mean, O3 is really smart. There's an economics professor at George Mason who's become a leading voice in AI, Tyler Cohen. He said he thinks O3 is AGI. I probably still don't think it's that, but he just asked a couple simple questions. Like, if you don't think this is AGI, what else do you want? Like, what else do you want this thing to do? Or what do you expect an AGI to be capable of? He's already thinking this thing's getting up there close to the ceiling and pushing through it. It's a pretty radical piece of technology. And we haven't even seen GPT-5 yet. Everyone knows that we're going to have an across-the-board intelligence explosion within these models. It's just a question of when, not if. Even the greatest skeptics like Gary Marcus, who doesn't think we can get there with large language models, still believes that we're going to get to artificial general intelligence, human level intelligence, or super intelligence. When you listen to Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, that's ChatGPT, he even talks about the importance of having a new social contract, both economically and potentially politically. And there was a big debate, just even at a little bit of a smaller level, on Twitter over the weekend among some leading experts about how we have to completely redefine what intellectual property is. That intellectual property is not meaningful anymore. And that's just a subset, right? You can think of how we've managed intellectual property as like a subset of the social contract. So these are huge changes that are coming to society. And I think we have to say education has just been the same, and we don't have these big questions here. And obviously AI is moving into business. It's obviously been moving into government in a controversial way. But for better or worse, it's been really, really slowly moving into education at least in most institutions. And education is arguably the foundation of society. We're not going to be able to sustain a structure, at least where education still plays an important role, if AI is being integrated into the government very rapidly, if it starts to get integrated into business very rapidly, and it just doesn't get education And it just doesn't get integrated into education. Education becomes disconnected from the rest of the world. And the only alternative really to moving AI into education and deliberatively considering its application is raw power. We want to keep education as the foundation of society, but education has to work in the society that it's in. So there's this kind of controversy, or, I don't know if it's like a controversy, but it's like a how-to question, right? If you show up at a school or some other institution to help them learn about AI and maybe adapt to AI, and there are people there who don't want to learn AI. They don't want to incorporate AI into their classroom or to help think about how we might have to change education in the future. And people say, how do you manage that? And to a degree, you just don't, because you don't work for the school directly. You don't have authority over the teachers or the professors. You can't make them do anything. And to a degree, if they don't want to, then they're just going to get left out. Think about iPads in the classroom. You talked about how iPads came into the classroom. And when the iPads came into the classroom, people showed up, often from Apple, and they helped the teacher use the iPad in the classroom. Now, they didn't go to classrooms where teachers refused to let there be an iPad physically present, right? So if there are people who don't want to use AI, then obviously we're not there to help them. So that's one thing, I'd really point out about the professional development. You can only help the people who want to be helped, and that's where the energy should go. I think the second thing is, when you started with that quote, it's interesting, saying, if we want to help people, how you started the podcast, we have to tell people the truth. And that's something else I see in this AI professional development space that doesn't always happen. People show up and they're like, oh, teachers are magic. Teachers are irreplaceable. They'll never be replaced. And I'm not saying that some people don't believe that. I'm not really saying that they're deliberately lying, that they think that teachers are going to be replaced and that they're telling the teachers something else. But if you think about it intuitively, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? It probably does for maybe grades 1 through 6. We're not going to let the robots be our babysitters, those types of things. So we're probably 20 or 30 years at a minimum out from elementary education, or elementary teachers being replaced by robots. But so I think someone could start their career tomorrow as an elementary school teacher and still retire as an elementary school teacher. But in higher ed and the upper levels of high school, beyond middle school, maybe beyond 9th or probably 10th grade, we're looking at some pretty significant changes there. I met somebody on LinkedIn. She's a professor. Now she's going to do consulting full time. And I reached out and I said, oh, congratulations. And she says, oh, thanks. Do you have any advice? And I said, well, yes, my advice is to lie. She said, what do you mean? I said, whenever you give a talk, just tell all the teachers and the professors they're never going to be replaced. I was like, then they'll invite you back. If you tell them the truth that, their jobs are at risk, they might not like that. So she kind of laughed. And I don't know, but I think that's something we have to really think about and talk about, right? Which kind of goes back into the social contract. Like we talked about at the beginning about how the AIs are going to be able to teach a lot of the content. So with AI, you can see that some schools are going faster than others. We also know that some kids are going to get left out and they're going to get left behind. We can see employment disruption that's coming, and that's a reality. And a lot of universities, they're facing a lot of challenges. It's not just what can AI do that maybe we have some people here already doing, but they're in the US, they're facing freezes of hiring funds. Universities in particular are facing a lot of challenges. They're grappling with their own kind of cost issues. They're struggling because they have declining enrollments due to the demographic cliff. There's declining enrollments due to people wondering about the value of a university education. In the United States, you have a lot of freezing of federal funds for various political reasons that's resulted in hiring freezes at the universities because they have fewer funds available for these other things. So university administrators, they're struggling with a lot of things, but I think that higher education, except for maybe some of the most elite professors or people who maybe want to be professors who are at the top of their fields right now, I don't know if I'd want to be planning my career as a professor unless I thought I was going to be one of the very best people in my field, just because I think that for all the reasons we mentioned, including AI, it's going to be very hard to get a job as a professor, and it's become more and more difficult to do so. It's just a very difficult space. And I think that's one thing that's difficult, right? Because professors now, they say, gee, I need PhD students in my program, so I can get funding for you, and tell them that they're all going to be successful and they're going to start their careers in these small colleges that are actually closing. And then someday you'll be a professor at a major institution. But to me, that's quite honestly, I think, a bit deceptive, at least if you play out the probabilities. I always say what advice would you give your own kid? I would never encourage one of my own kids to be a professor right now. It's just probably not going to be a great career path. When they're done with college or graduate school, one of my sons, he's going to be 22. He just graduated from college now, but say he went back and he got a PhD and it took him 8 years. Is he really going to be like 8 years from now? He's really going to get that job in the university, at least as a traditional professor like we currently imagine? Probably not. So I just think we need to be a little more honest with people, because schools ultimately, they're not employment agencies. They don't exist for the purpose of giving people jobs. They exist for the purpose of educating kids. And if kids could be educated better or almost as well at 5% of the cost, then people don't like hearing that, but that's honest, right? And it's not just in education. We can look out, we can see there's fewer computer programmers being hired. A company that hires a computer programmers, they're also not employment agencies. So if they can get the code written as well or better, or at least close at 5 to 10% of the cost, then they're going to use the AI. And education, like I say, it's just no different. I mentioned earlier when I said we put in the show notes, there's a similar article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that goes into more detail about how AIs are going to be able to do a lot of university teaching. And a friend of mine who's a professor, he showed it to the provost at his university. The provost is the person in charge of academic affairs. Basically, you can think of it as your instructional superintendent. And he also just shared a couple quotes in the article because it was really long. And the provost was like, at first, oh my God, this is false. But then he's thinking, yes, this is probably going to be true. And that society just really isn't ready for this type of restructuring that's going to happen, right? They're thinking, oh, well, a lot of people are just focused on how do we manage this kid potentially writing a paper with AI, or what kind of advice are we going to give about when it's okay to write your paper with AI or when it's not, and exactly how can you use it, and should you use MLA citations, and what's going to happen if I catch you? Should it be a harder disciplinary process or a softer one? So many people are just still consumed by that conversation. And to me, I hate to say it, but it's basically irrelevant. We're looking at a complete restructuring of society in general, potentially needing a whole new social contract along all lines of intellectual property, and then within the education system, how students are taught and how students learn. That's all going to change. What percentage of AI can be in a paper is like 0.001% of the questions we're facing. So I really wish the conversation could move from beyond that.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the other things that I thought was really interesting about the comment, like doing it this way is consistent with the theory of change. And I'm not going to sit here and defend my thoughts around research and evidence-based things. I think anyone who knows us knows how much we lean into research and evidence-based practices. However, every single moment, like you said, signals, right? We talk about that a lot on the podcast too. Things that previously existed or models about change that existed before do deserve some sort of evaluation for this current moment. Because one of the things that I thought was really interesting was if you try to apply a slow change theory, mindset, philosophy, bell curve, whatever it is, to a technology that has never rapidly advanced and accelerated as quickly as AI has, you actually risk really leaving people behind instead of helping them really adapt and reckon with the moment. And I'm starting to see this a lot more and more as well. I think what really did it for me was we talked last week about how Google, so if this is something that is still new to you, last week we shared how Google have made their core AI tools available to everybody who has Workspace for Education. Okay. Now, definitely there is a cap to how many times you can do something. If you've had the advanced licenses, those caps are removed. But the point is, for the first time, every single educator, and this is exclusive to the United States, every single educator in the United States now has access to a high quality large language model. And it's not just the large language model. It is the ability to create gens, which is their version of custom GPTs or a custom chatbot. It's the ability to do deep research, right? I mean, Notebook LM, which I think was always there. The possibilities for what you can do now with a combination of those tools is so, like when I was with the leadership team yesterday, I was showing them and they felt like they were at a magic show, like jaw dropped. And what's really been fascinating to me. Obviously, we've been calling everybody, letting everybody know. We've been doing workshops. And by the way, we are going to be hosting next week a free webinar walking you through all of these updates to Google to show you, they're not updates, but what's available to you and how to use them and how you can access them and the different ideas. And we're going to share strategies and all that kind of stuff for Google and for Canva. So I'll drop the link to sign up to the webinar in the show notes. Join us. It's going to be free. It's going to be amazing. You're going to love it. But we've been doing these so much. And here is the number one thing I have observed. Nobody is really ready with the skill set or even the systems to actually take advantage of what they have now. And it used to be, you could say, when we normally did things, yes, you would play with things, you would test things, and you would do whatnot. And then slowly, you could be ready for what comes next. The challenge with AI, which, we always say is very unforgiving in how it treats society and the world and just people. If you had spent, and I know I'm also not really one to talk about the past in terms of we did this or we should have done this, but I do think this moment deserves that, because it's like that Maya Angelou quote, do the best you can with what you have, then when you know better, do better. And I just keep going back to 2 years ago. If people had the conversation that you just said right now, we know the system's going to be disrupted. We know we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them. We don't even like the system. We don't even like what we have. It's destroying us mentally, physically, emotionally, socially. What can we do differently? And what I continuously find is most people are so limited in their mindset by all the barriers and all the trauma and all the things they haven't been able to do, that they need a whole workshop on how to untangle themselves from that mindset. There was a person in a workshop. It was every single time you say something, there's 2 things people will say. Well, I do this, this, this. It's very I-centered. And I'm like, I really need you to zoom out. And the other thing we often hear is, yeah, but my district won't let me do this. Yeah, but my principal this. Yeah, but this. And there's just this barrier that people say. And it got to a point in one workshop where I just had to say, I really need you to put the barriers in one compartment and allow yourself permission to think differently in this compartment here. And if you can't think differently, I need you to use this prompt with AI to help you generate some ideas and get some inspiration. And a person actually said, whoa, yeah, our mindsets really are tangled in with these barriers. And so I think a lot of people who actually are resistant to AI, that people think they just need to quickly give them a quick fix. It's that difference between, can I do that? That is the hard human work. And I think at a time when we talk a lot about job displacement and people being replaced, it's really also important to know there are a lot of things people are needed for, a lot of things. The question is, are you ready to rise to the occasion to be the person who's willing to do the hard human work? Because the hard human work now isn't going to be writing up a 30-page paper. It's not going to be writing that summary report. It's not going to be making that PowerPoint deck. The hard human work now is going to be the conversations, the implementation, the navigating, the messiness of socialization. And I think the reason I also really am relentless on this, please start being nicer and talk to people nicer, especially children, is I was really surprised to see, I guess I was surprised, but not surprised to see that the number one use case, was it the Harvard Business Review that did like the top 100 use cases? I think the number one use case was therapy and life advice. I think we have to pause and ask the question, especially of education, who is so, we're irreplaceable because of relationships. The number one choice for people and use case for how they're using an LLM is what you think you are exclusively really great at. And I think if you don't pause to even ask that question, you do yourself a disservice, you do your organization a disservice, and you really do the education industry as a whole a disservice.
Yes, and what we're talking about brings up a couple thoughts. You were talking about a PhD, and I said earlier, I wouldn't be a professor. But I still think there's a lot of value to getting a PhD because you learn how to do research and think through and analyze studies, see where your data is weak, what further research needs to be done. And knowing how to do that is all valuable. I just don't think it's going to get applied in the same way. And these tools may make it easier for everybody to essentially have the knowledge of a PhD for all its weaknesses, institutionalized, so to speak. people are more educated now than they were 150 years ago. And these other models are going to make it there. I think the second thing to think about, especially if you're a little older, it's harder when you get to you're 12 or 13, right, to think about these things, but to really know your strengths. I was listening to this person, Travis, the guy, I forget his last name, but he started Uber and he started some other companies. And now he has this new company. And somebody was asking him a question just about starting a business. And he's like, well, once you have the idea and you start the business and you get it up and running, you really need to think hard about what your role in the business will be. He's like, you want to be the CEO because you started it, but are you really the best person to be the CEO? It doesn't have to be. And I was just also listening to a podcast about one of the founders of Anthropic, who I've never even really heard of. We're always talking about Dario and his sister, and I think Dario likes the public role, so you hear more from him than his sister. But they're actually 5 other co-founders, and the co-founder I was listening to before he came to Anthropic, when he met Dario at this conference, and he was one of the co-founders, actually a physics professor. And now he's the chief scientist or the head of research. And on this podcast, he's really unpacking these kinds of things about research. And I was thinking about comparing him to Dario in terms of kind of a public presence. Dario is a much stronger public presence. This guy really didn't have it. But he was obviously brilliant. He had a PhD in physics from Harvard, and he was working at Johns Hopkins at the time, and that's where he met Dario. So probably the guys wouldn't have been the best choice for the CEO, but he's obviously really, really good at this head of research or chief scientist. So I think everybody just needs to think about what are their roles. In Anthropic, they use AI for a lot of things. So they haven't gotten rid of everybody, right? It's not just Dario and his sister. So it's not like AI is about to take over and get rid of all people, even if it needs fewer people. So people really need to think about what are their strengths. There are a lot of roles for humans. It's just the roles that the humans shift, right? We shifted from the agriculture era to the industrial era. And the one thing, technology is so advancing so fast, it also does take society a bit of time to move, right? We see the companies that seem to be replacing more of their engineers and computer science people with AI are people really at the forefront of the technology. It's not like your local computer repair shop. You don't go in and have your computer serviced by a robot, or they don't fix some project you're working on. I joked when I was at the thing with you the last week, right? You asked people in the next session, you said, I could make some videos available. I could put all this stuff online, or I could come here and work with you guys again for an hour and a half. And they're all like, yeah, come back. They wanted you to come back because they have confidence in you. They enjoy the interaction with you. You're a fellow human. You're around their age, like all these things. You can adapt in the spur of the moment. When they have a question, you can come up with at least what you think might be an answer. You can discuss it with them. Whether it's content, you can think through of it. You have a broad perspective on education and AI and the interaction between the two. So rather than just sitting at home and watching videos that they could listen to at any of their own time, they wanted another human there, right, to work with them. So there's just so many roles for humans. I talked a lot at the beginning. It probably sounded a bit pessimistic. Oh, everyone's going to be replaced with AIs. If you look at some of the job functions that you have now, one of the functions you perform is that you help them understand AI education and you deliver the content. Could that element of it be replaced? Yes, but there's all these other elements that we just talked about that they're actually interested and they want. And that's really where you shine through.
And I think that's the really sad part. And I think that's one of the things why we very much so go out of our way to really say this is I always think about legacy and I always think about impact and I always think about responsibility when you are talking about things, both the good and the bad, and being able to say hard things. Like it's definitely not easy. Would it be easier for us to just sit here and just do the rah and all the exciting stuff and do that? Yes, you can see the applause that definitely gets and how hyped people get. We could sit here and give you prompts to go be ChatGPT, tell me everything about me that I don't know about myself and whatnot. But a really big part of what we hope to do and really what our goal is to really help you think through the larger implications, because we are living through, and I don't know how this isn't something that more people think about, but we are living through in this moment the implications of our failed actions over the past 2 decades. From a technology perspective, from a social, political, economic perspective, we are live living through the consequences of what happens when people don't pay attention to things in real time and they don't think about the long-term implications. And one of the long-term implications that we also put on people's radar is this idea of when you're going to put these tools into kids' hands, be really thoughtful, have a really good plan beyond a set of traffic lights for how you're going to talk to them so that tomorrow, when they have to make that decision,
of, hey, I need to do this. Do I go to AI? Do I go to a person? Do I do this? Do I do that? There's no traffic lights in real life to help them navigate. The world is not made up of carved out roads where predictable paths. If anything, it's the total opposite. There's no predictability whatsoever. And so really giving people the skills to navigate things, I think, is the responsibility of each and every single person leading these conversations, to not just come up with a solution that's going to appease people, but to really have the hard conversations and sit with the hard conversations until you get to that place that really does justice to the kids that we are serving. So again, if you would like to see some of these updates and all of these things live, please join us for our free webinar. We'll drop the link into the show notes. Definitely focused a little bit more on one area, and next we'll probably be back with our usual round of a ton more topics and roundups. As always, if you have any questions, let us know. Other than that, have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Designing Schools community. Leaving a review for the podcast helps others learn about the show, giving them the gift of knowledge and allowing this community to help create access and exposure to ideas and opportunities others may not even know exist.